I remember it was the last day of the 4th grade. The ladies in the front office always made a little video for the kids that were moving on to middle school because at the school I went to, it was only kindergarten through 4th. So we sat there and watched ourselves in a montage of the last almost 5 years, and it felt like a lifetime had passed since then. Relatively speaking, 5 years of your life as a 10-year-old was half of your life, so it seemed big to you. It's this whole thing called time dilation, and it's an asinine concept in the scope of simple humanity. But I remember sitting in the stands watching the video catch up to the current year. It reminded me of all that happened that year. That was the first year I had experienced grief, the year that my uncle had died. He was the type of guy that every time he was around, he would show me how to run Adobe Flash or some form of program on the computer, the type of guy that would try and muster up a joke in every scenario. He always said, "See you later, alligator," to me, awaiting for the only reasonable response of, after a while, crocodile. But the last day I'd seen him, he forgot. He said he'd remember next time and walked out the door. It felt colder on that December day. As the final lines of Hannah Montana's "I'll Always Remember You" goes into its bridge of Nas, I just felt overwhelmed with everything. I felt hopeless. So when the video finished up, I looked up and desperately wanted to run away. But at the bottom of the bleachers was my dad, who at the time was someone who I thought was steady in his life, becoming my symbol of courage. I broke down into tears, him putting his arm around me as I wept. I looked at him and asked, "Why do people and things have to change?" And his response has stuck with me ever since. Because it's the only thing this world is best at doing. On a side note, welcome to review number 49 of Shrug Reviews, today's topic being the titular defying mecha anime of the millennia, Neon Genesis Evangelion. Neon Genesis Evangelion. What a mouthful. The series was created by Hideaki Anno and aired from October 1995 to March 1996. The original series revolved around the city of Tokyo 3, 15 years following an event called the Second Impact. These things called angels, which are typically referred to as extraterrestrial creatures, have an obsession with the place as they keep on attacking there. Then this organization called NERV holds these giant organic robot creatures called Evas, and our sweet traumatized little protagonist named Shinji has been pulled by his dad to pilot said robot. No more need to dwell on that, because the series has been around for quite some time now. It's considered a classic to many, trash to others, and some boring mech anime to the other few. And all are legitimate takes from the show, as being in the genre that it is, there are many that take this concept and run with it way better. Gurren Lagann, a show that is held very dear to my heart, is an example of what can be done in aspects such as scale, message, and conveyance of important details to its audience. Not that everything should be handed to you in every piece of media, but while Evangelion is ambiguous in its message, Gurren Lagann plays all of its cards on the table and can still keep the conversation going. But that isn't a bad thing at all. Evangelion grants a unique perspective at telling its story through themes of grief, trauma, depression, and to put it simply, being messed up in the head. It looks at each of their characters not as simple cookie-cutter molds, but taking these molds and putting a spin on what was previously established. Because all of these characters have been seen plenty of times before from myself and others, but it takes these struggles and amplifies them into a realistic scenario. The original series had 26 episodes in total, taking a total direction change by around episode 17, but I'd argue that it was around episode 13 where the series really hit its stride and started getting more and more chaotic. The first half of the series was this episodic monster of the week type show, introducing the main cast, sometimes having some intense emotional struggles, but nothing to the degree that was presented in the latter half of the show. The series became this existential debate of dealing with fear and issues in an unhealthy way, culminating in one of the most infamous finales in anime history. Evangelion's biggest struggle is pacing, because while one episode handles Shinji getting sick of everything and running away, the next is him dealing with not being able to talk to girls. While that's not too horrible, the first half of the series seems rather slow at the beginning, taking a while to really pull you in and propose this form of uniqueness that the show is so well known for. I found myself getting bored halfway through some episodes at the beginning, just because I didn't feel very invested in the episodic plot. Now, the second half doesn't have that issue, looking more into the declining mental state of the main characters, the desperate attempt at human survival, and the depressing state of the world and what it's turning into. I overall didn't think that Evangelion was some masterpiece, but it was unique in its approach to its storytelling and message conveyance that I looked more into it, The latter half of the series was definitely what brought more interest and kept me frequently invested in what was going on. This world is painted as this hopeless environment that has no way of forming itself back into what it was after the second impact, establishing that the Human Instrumentality Project is the next step in creating that hope back. The precipice of the show teeters on this whole project and its success, correlating with this internal downfall that Shinji has in rejecting everyone around him. Shinji's issues lie within struggling with people, so it seems as though this project was the most ideal situation for him. People hurt Shinji, so he develops this inner wall to not let people in, most commonly referred to in the show as the Hedgehog's Dilemma. This slowly worsens throughout the series, as the people he's let in have ultimately either betrayed him, berated him, or abandoned him during his time of need, forming this people-pleaser complex inside of his head. And then the finale arrived. Shinji is scared of everyone, Asuka's a skeleton, this new Rei is an enigma, and Katsuragi's just had enough. Human instrumentality has begun and has brought upon this new perspective into humanity for this universe, going case by case into the internal war that is plaguing our cast. The ultimate conclusion is to reject instrumentality, seeing that people are meant to disagree and not all be one, because that's not how humanity was made. That goes into probably the most iconic scene from Evangelion, where the main cast congratulates Shinji on not giving into the project, seeing that despite humans' issues, there's still worth in differences, and what a message it is. Now, I won't tell you what to see from this ending, as this finale is meant to be interpreted in many different ways, and whether you blame that on seeing the series as a problematic production all the way to the end, or it was always intended to be this ambiguous mess with not very many answers, we can all agree. But it was at this point I came to this visceral realization that I hate Shinji because I had too many issues similar to him. I'm in full support of relating to main characters and finding aspects and good qualities to learn from, but Shinji is a character that I dreaded relating to in any way. Shinji's not a good character. Despite being the figurehead of the series, none of the main cast is. None of them are good people, but that's kind of what makes it interesting. My dad walked out on my family when I was younger. I think he had some unchecked mental issues on top of the layered substance abuse throughout his life. When I had gotten older, he tried his best, but failed miserably at being a father. I don't remember him being normal past getting into high school, but I would see his face slammed against a cop car in the front of the newspaper. I'd get the phone calls saying how he's messed up his life and how he shouldn't have been my dad. And the amount of times that hospitals would call me to come get him because he wouldn't pay his bills was just unfathomable. The consistent turmoil of being rejected by the only other guaranteed family I had was terrifying. I grew these internal issues of abandonment and fear of getting too close to people. And upon watching the series, the thoughts of abandonment, manipulation, and rejection flooded over me. I hated Shinji, and I hated being like him, and the more I went through the series, the more I dreaded seeing how his story was going to end. And I know even more how I didn't want to be that Evangelion fan, but it just turned out that way. I didn't gain a third eye in any cranial capacity. I just saw myself in a character like so many others do with this form of media, or just any form of media in general. This entire franchise itself is one of the biggest and influential pieces of media that has left such a huge subjective divide amongst avid anime viewers and newcomers alike. But then the ending came. Penultimate decision and realization that struggles are natural and not existent to just yourself is, to me, the best way to perceive how Evangelion ends. The perpetual dread of having problems that can't be solved is overshadowed by knowing that there are people that have gone through what you have as well. And even then, no matter if people have experienced your pain or not, there are people who care so genuinely when you hurt as well. And that's why I love this ending so much. I just love seeing all the people supporting Shinji in the end despite his complete and utter dissonance with anyone because of his constant emotional offense. I'm not the only one that's experienced heartbreak, trauma, pain, but there will be people that will share the same burden just as much as I share happiness, joy, and laughter with the people I love. And that stems from the one consistent notion in the show. Change is the only thing that the world is best at doing. Shinji took his first step by realizing his ability to change, and as unrealistic as it is to fully change in that one instance, it takes that first step of progress that makes much of a difference. And having people to cheer you on makes that first step so much easier. Change turns heartbreak into clarity, trauma into wisdom, and sorrow into victory. And sometimes it just takes time to get there. Just one step at a time. The end of Evangelion does quite a number on the series as a whole, taking what was previously established in the series as the finale and doing this to it. The end of Eva was released a year after the initial final episode, being somewhat of a response to all of the haters of the other ending. The film took place directly after episode 24, and showing the aftermath of meeting Kaoru, and even showing what happens after episode 26, I think. It filled in the missing plot holes of things that I was really confused over at the very least. And you know what I think about this movie? Do you really want to know? It was really, really weird. Sheer chaos, taking any progress made in the original show and just throwing that out the window to replace it with insanity, disgust, confusion, and an overall message of screw you to the fans, which by all means, I applaud Anno for doing it. This movie itself was a big kick in the teeth to Evangelion fans, and that's the type of attitude that I think is so spectacular. I don't think it's a horrible movie, but there's a definite difference between the show and the film. Anno's history of clinical depression was one of the many reasons that the show was fixated on looking at the multitudes of psychological quandaries and to look into different perspectives of having their own issues, and on the surface, you can appreciate the show for the message it's trying to convey. But the fans became this rather large issue as death threats were sent to the team because they got a little sad that it didn't end how they wanted it. So Anno picked up his pants and decided to pull the biggest reverse card on the fans by releasing End of Evangelion. The end of Eva's controversial ending is made by Shinji's similar judgment from the show, but deciding to reach it in a totally different way. Because now at the end of the film, all of his friends are dead, his dad is dead, his robot mommy is gone, and the one person left alone with him is Asuka. And we all know why that's a little weird. And no, I'm not going to talk about why. Shinji decides to reject instrumentality again, coming back to humanity, but when he does, he tries to kill the only other person still technically alive with him. And as he cries, we look upon the red lace sea and see the world in its finality, destroyed and desperate once again. Anno deciding to take this total reverse and destroy everything he had previously established was a move that I'd never seen before. He literally just made it in spite of the fans because he ultimately hates this property. He could have literally never done anything with the series and left it at that, but his extent of creating this movie and for others just to ruin the series speaks volumes. Like the extent of how people preach Eva to be the peak of fiction and a prime example from a psych textbook is kind of unreal. End of Eva is such an enigma to me. Its loose ends are tied up in some ways, and then more questions are added as well. Shinji's the catalyst of this whole story, being the subsequent cause of the third impact by going into a panic. But I guess that's to be expected when the whole entire Earth and everyone you love is being absorbed into a giant version of your soul-bonded sister, mom, I don't know. The ending is just this feeling of dread that the series didn't touch on at all. It really is one of those pick your poison type of deals where you end up picking which ending you want, but it links back to that subject of change. My dad passed away in August of 2020, a year in which everyone was struggling, not just me. I had just recently gotten out of a long-term relationship that made me into an emotional mess already, but then I remember that phone call from my brother, thinking about, he never calls me. He only calls when it's important. His crying on the other end gave me chills before he could muster up any of the words that he was going to say. At the time, I was working at a summer camp, and I walked through the field with the sun beating down on me, clouds rolling around, the sun repeating the words, 1 month left. I felt my heart transposed with this uneasy feeling as I kept wondering when the clock would end. Final conversations, questions surrounding his absence, and just so much confusion. And the clock stopped. I listened to Cascade by Taisho driving home that day, thinking back to Tom's last goodbye to Tanami as Steve Bloom's lines seamlessly rolled off in this somber manner.
So, until we meet again, stay gold. Bang.
It made it feel like I just started this mystery that I could never solve, very well that had no chance of figuring out the reasoning behind it. I was the one in the family stuck with cleaning out his house of hoarded messes and garbage. Spent the next month and a half in there looking for any semblance of any clues to the one question I could never get answered. Why? And it hurt. I felt alone. I was jealous of others. Like I'd gained some formal insight about struggling for so long, but feeling just as lost at the same time. It was a spiral of feeling that was incapable of being conquered. Some days felt like it made sense, while others felt like that it was just another conspiracy dug up from ashes. It was a feeling of confusion, but a feeling of revelation, a feeling that wouldn't find clarity until I watched that stupid ending to the end of Evangelion. Shinji's lighthearted and seemingly more attractive version of his resolve pales in comparison to the desolate and bleak loneliness that's portrayed in the film. Shinji's view of Asuka in the climax of the film sends him into a violent fit. This is one of the most important scenes in the movie, sending Shinji into his final moments with an instrumentality, establishing his end goal. Even with that, he ends the film on a somber note, Asuka calling him out on his garbage from earlier on in the film. The end of Eva becomes the second side to the Evangelion coin, and while I don't understand all of it, maybe that was the point. This tragedy of a film is meant to be a foil to the previous installment of the series, but still has that same type of feeling to its main protagonist. The subject of change can never become cleared, even if we don't understand why people act in a certain way. Change is never claimed to be easy, and I think the end of Evangelion knows that.
People get built different. We don't need to figure it out, we just need to respect it.
But maybe it's not supposed to make sense. Maybe it's all incoherently made with the intent of not understanding what trauma can do to people, or maybe we don't understand anything and it's all just a ruse created by Anno to seem like he knew what he was doing. Or maybe the fans are foolish enough to dwell into every detail and make the series something that it isn't. It could all be something that is considered a masterpiece and just be something that was created as a thing of circumstance, a circumstance to discuss evolution in people, but it can be seen as something purposeful and spiraling into some big metaphor when the answer is right on the surface. Or maybe it's too boring to look into, causing this uprising of different perspectives arguing about this series that's rooted in confusion, having this domino effect into more confusion and creating more of a concave division between people, destroying their view of how the show has helped them change. After all, art's subjective, right? People can find ways to change themselves in anything, and maybe that's the point. Or maybe we're just thinking too hard about giant robots.